Well, thank Shinx Pokemon exists. Gas prices be damned. That does not apply to me. What do you mean I have to pay air taxes? This is my Dragonite! Hey, what's good, y'all? Soul here, and welcome back to my story mode. So, it was really nice to chit-chat a little bit about Pokopia, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it soon enough. But we do need to get back on track and talk a little bit more about Pokemon Winds and Waves. Like I'm gonna have to keep emphasizing for a little while here, at this point in time, we don't know a single thing outside of what's revealed in the trailer for Pokemon Winds and Waves. Which means that this is the best time humanly possible to get as ridiculous with these conversations as we possibly can. Of course, we'll probably end up exhausting a lot of these questions and discussions soon enough, and we will have to talk about a couple of other things. We might have to do a little bit of revisiting, and we do have Pokemon champions around the corner, so stay tuned for all that. That being said though, there has been one question on my mind that's been circulating in there for a couple of years now, not just since Pokemon Winds and Waves. But my question is there a chance we could get a real, true villain in Winds and Waves? Before we get into my question though, yeah, you need to relax, you need to breathe, you need to kick back on that recliner that's behind you and put your feet up. If you look to the table beside you, you'll find a nice rim-salted glass of pineapple juice, cool from the fridge, because ice, we don't do that in this house. We kick it to the curb, we throw some rocks at it. Tonight, our chef has prepared a nice plate of what appears to be Gengar meat. I'm not sure how they managed that one, but you have a full bucket of Alfredo sauce to dip that in while we talk about if Pokemon Winds and Waves could use an actual villain. First things first, I want to explain why my mindset is in this position to begin with. When it comes to the narratives of recent Pokemon games, it feels like we've been kind of in a weird place, no? Whether or not the stories were good or bad is completely subjective, but one thing that's kind of hard to argue is the fact that for the most part, most of these games, on the Switch era at least, were lacking a villain. Most recently, with Pokemon Legends ZA, we had more of an entity that we had to fight, something that's been growing for years upon years that just kind of exploded out of control. I wouldn't really consider that much of an antagonist in of itself. There wasn't necessarily a group or a person that was in favor of what was happening within Lumio City, with all of the mega power gathering within Angie. That wasn't really a planned or intended situation. It just kind of happened, and for the most part, throughout your journey in Pokemon Legends ZA, your entire purpose was to help prevent that from happening. Of course, you could pin the blame on AZ, for example, for building the contraption in the first place, or you could blame Lysander for being the one to set the weapon off to begin with that set everything in motion. The problem with casting that blame though is the fact that both of these characters already good and well recognize their mistakes and have set out in their own different ways to fix it. In AZ's defense, he was putting himself on the front lines, constantly handling the threat of rogue mega evolved Pokemon, so much so that people didn't even really know what was going on. It was so kept under wraps to the point where his body was falling apart and he could not do it alone anymore. He had to ask for outside help. To a lot of people's surprise, Quasartico Inc. was not evil at all. They set up the ZA Royale to seek out the strongest possible trainers to help neutralize this threat. In a way, you could say that the way that they went about things was a little underhanded, but that was just their way of trying to keep the people from going into a mass panic. Obviously, I never felt annoyed or betrayed by them doing something like that. I was just happy to help. And then, on the other hand, there is Lysander, who was moving from the shadows in edgy fashion, trying to make sure that you were going to be strong enough to eventually be able to handle the ultimate mega power that lies within Zygarde. He had already good and well recognized his mistakes, which is why he called out the irony that AZ wasn't really being all that truthful with everybody about what actually happened. But at the end of the day, Lysander was there with everybody at AZ's grave because he good and well knows that the man regrets what he did and did everything he could to make amends for that. He acknowledged AZ as another side of the same coin, just two guys trying to figure out how to make amends for things that they did wrong in their past. So in the case of Legends ZA, there was no villain, there was no villainous intent, there was no evil to truly be done, just something that needed to be fixed. I think that they did a good job there. This is obviously a story that I don't really think needed much of a villain. It could have been a typical situation in which Quasartico Inc. was gathering up a bunch of rogue mega evolved power to utilize for God knows what, and that could have been fun on its own merit, but For how it turned out here, I'm not mad about that at all. Though I do wish the story could have played more into the idea of Quasartico Inc. being this kind of like figure that was making some weird and rash decisions that the player and other people didn't understand throughout the city, so that we could have some kind of like evil entity only for them to really truly prove themselves to be the ultimate defense mechanism against what was happening with Angie. Because I truly do believe that could have played into some really interesting character development, right? This big corporation that was willing to take the fall and be pointed at as the bad guy so that everybody else wouldn't have to worry about it, so they could get done whatever they needed to get done. That didn't really happen at all. Regardless though, there was no villain in Legends EA, but it kind of worked out without one. And I feel like it's a very similar case in the aspect of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. The essential rough idea is that the professors had a little too much chip on their dip when they were researching Pokemon from either the future or the past. They ended up getting themselves killed in the midst of a territorial dispute between the box legendaries and left it up to the AI versions of themselves to keep handling the research. The AI professors realized that leaving the Paradox Pokemon unchecked could make it so that Paldea could be in actual danger if this situation wasn't handled. So they turned to the player character, who they warned well in advance. Hey, if you attempt to shut down this operation, the Paradise Protection Protocol will come into effect, and I will not be able to stop myself from carrying out those orders. I will try to fight and stop you. But the point is, the AI in of itself knew the dangers that were to come if this project wasn't stopped. So it feels kind of wrong to go into this saying that there was an actual bad guy or a villain here. There wasn't a villain. It was never intended to cause anybody harm. The professor that was creating everything just happened to pass away before it could get properly checked by them. Irresponsible and extremely unfortunate? Absolutely. Science doesn't come without costs sometimes. But in this case, their lives were taken before they could put themselves in check. It happens sometimes. But again, this is another prime example of no real villain or evil being present within Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I'm sure there's people out there that could probably try to argue that Team Star was the antagonistic force this time around, but not really at all, right? These were misunderstood and mistreated kids that went out of their way to protect themselves and other people that felt the same way. The only time they fought somebody like that was when they felt somebody was trying to do them harm. The operation needed to be dismantled because the development of Team Star got way out of hand, way bigger than intended, and now there was a bunch of kids just not going to school and scaring people away at any given opportunity when they got too close. Again, not evil, not antagonistic, just a straight up misunderstanding. Still made for a pretty fun little story though. I like Scarlet and Violet. Just a damn shame that they were released in the state that they were, but we've talked more about that than I would like to, so moving on. Now, we could absolutely consider the fact that the two games before that did actually have direct antagonists. My only real issue with that is that neither of them presented themselves until the absolute complete end of the games. For me personally, it made for the base story of Pokemon Legends Arceus to be a little on the weaker side. And you could easily say it's more of my fault for having expectations high enough to think that they would actually do something important with the Diamond and Pearl clan and stuff like that, but regardless, the story was just not that strong to me overall. It is what it is. But I do appreciate the fact that we had Volo at all. He was a cool antagonist, and easily one of the most threatening as well. Casually summoning Giratina like that was terrifying. It did make for an interesting concept, making it so that all of Jubilife Town saw the player as an enemy. It made for a really interesting portrayal and stuff like that that we don't usually see in Pokemon stories. But I feel like that portrayal would have been a lot stronger if I felt any form of attachment to Volo beforehand. Like, yeah, Volo was a cool character that showed up a handful of times in the primary story, but for the most part, you were dealing with a lot of other things that Volo wasn't even really present for, or at least not to the player's knowledge. I don't know. It just felt like the story came across as off-screen, and I just wasn't a big fan. In a very similar and much worse case, Pokemon Sword and Shield. We don't need to talk about Rose again, do we? A very clearly underwritten character that didn't really serve much to the overall plot at all and only created something for the sake of making a plot. I don't know, it just didn't really feel like much of an antagonist to me. He wasn't threatening at all, and it was going out of his way to create a situation that would not have happened otherwise for God knows how long. So I think that most can safely agree that Rose was one of the weakest antagonists in the series. It's not crazy to say. All of that being said, do we understand where my head's at now? I simply feel that we have been lacking a true, much more direct antagonist that is present within the game. The last couple of games have proven that it's not something that's a complete necessity or anything like that, but it's something that I would like to see in this modern style of Pokemon games. So naturally, we look to Pokemon Winds and Waves, thinking, what is the situation going to look like here? The general vibe of the trailer gives the idea that we're going for a more like fun and lighthearted tropical adventure throughout the islands within the region, which in of itself is totally cool and all, but if 7th Gen taught us anything, it's that looks can be really deceiving. So we could be in yet another situation in which we don't necessarily have an antagonist, but we have a situation that needs to be handled within the story of Winds and Waves, or we could be looking at something totally different where we do actually have a direct antagonist. It could really go either way. So after having this conversation about the aspects of villainy within the most recent Pokemon titles, I pose my question once again. Do we need a villain in Pokemon Winds and Waves? Now, there's two sides of my belief here. On one hand, after talking about it just now, there's a part of me that believes that maybe we could be okay without a direct antagonist like that. The proof being Pokemon Legends ZA and Scarlet and Violet. Despite not having a direct villain, they were still able to make fun, unique, and nuanced stories. Well, as nuanced as you can get with a Pokemon story anyway, but I think they still did a pretty damn good job for the most part. Obviously not perfect, lacking in certain elements that could be improved upon, but who's to say they can't try again with something like Winds and Waves, making a nuanced story without having your typical overarching villain. These games have more than proven that that's totally possible. On top of that, we have been slowly watching them break away from tradition when it comes to Pokemon games. Starting from 7th Gen on, it's been more than your typical go out, get the badges, fight the bad guy, get your last badge, fight the Elite Four, and beat the champion. We haven't actually done just that in a really long time now. And frankly, I'm just really happy that they're willing to make any sort of changes, even if they are a little bit more subtle than people realize. I'm primarily saying that I would like to see a villain now only because we haven't seen it in a good while now. If they were still doing the traditional format up to this point, we would all be begging for some form of change. But it's because of the changes that we've seen throughout the years that I would love to see what they would do with a villain in the modern era of Pokemon. How would they write something like that now? What would their goals be? I'm just so curious. But I'm also happy about the fact that I'm at the point now where even if we didn't get a villain, like something super obvious, I'd be totally okay with that too, because I know that they could still manage to write something really fun. I especially think that way now because looking back, even though I do love the older generations of Pokemon and actually having true antagonists, a lot of their plans and a lot of the ways that they went about them was really cartoonish, right? Of course, there were a lot more serious situations in previous games that had deeper meanings and themings with them, but those goals usually led to one of two things: either completely destroy the world or rule it. Like, don't get me wrong, Giovanni's a cool guy and all, he's a badass, but he's so comically evil. Like, legitimately, like the most baseline power-hungry guy ever. There's really not that much nuance to Giovanni. Reasons like this is why Generation 5's story hits so hard for a lot of people. Team Plasma's actual goal made for a compelling argument, and I'm sure most people can agree that there is no better antagonist than one that actually believes he is the hero. And that is especially the case when they make thought-provoking arguments. Like, people really never considered the possibility that we might be forcing these Pokemon into this. We make them battle and hurt each other for sport. What if they want to decide for themselves what they want to do with their lives? Why do we have control over that? Capturing them, basically enslaving them in a way. Kind of a tough lesson to try and give to a bunch of like 10 to 15-year-olds playing Pokemon for the first time, but hey, you know what? I'm glad they did it at all. Which is why if we were to have another real villain in Pokemon Winds and Waves, I would love for it to be somebody like Getsis. But even if that wasn't the case, I think we'd be okay for the most part. Obviously though, there is the other half of me that would absolutely argue in the favor of having a more traditional villain. For one thing, when a real villain is involved, they usually add actual stakes. Their direct actions are actually potentially causing very real damage to the world of Pokemon. Having somebody like that looming over the narrative makes for a hell of an incentive to get stronger so that you could take on said threat. The entire idea behind something like Team Rocket was that there was a genuine group of criminals out there hurting people in Pokemon. So as the player, naturally we took it into our own hands to see said threat. Same thing with Team Aqua Magma. galactic, plasma, whatever. These people always answered to strength first, and you were strengthening your Pokemon throughout your journey to let them know what the hell is what. And I've always liked the idea behind something like that. Right, imagine you're in a town that's been taken over by a group of villains, essentially, and some unsung hero waltzes in with their team of 6 and trounces all of them single-handedly. And I feel like because it's an RPG where we're just consistently going from town to town, not really looking back as much, we don't really get to revel in that aspect as much. But looking back on it, we couldn't do that without villains being present, you know? In a very similar vein, these villains doing things throughout the narrative, whether it's hurting people, Pokemon, or hurting the world in some way, makes it so that there's actual stakes. Don't get me wrong, every Pokemon game's narrative has stakes in one way or another. But in particular, the last couple of games have felt more along the lines of, oh, hey, this thing is kind of slowly developing and you're kind of slowly finding out about it during your journey. Maybe you'll want to handle that before it gets out of hand. God knows when. And you know, that's totally fine and all. It still meant that there was still something to be stopped and people to be saved, of course, but I do like a situation every now and again where a villain or an antagonist is pushed up against a wall and forced to do something drastic that really puts the world at stake immediately. Even though narratively, Generation 6 wasn't one of the strongest in the Pokemon series, Lysander, or Lysandre, however you say his name, was an absolute nutcase and needed to be handled as soon as humanly possible. Ergo, there were real stakes. If he didn't get stopped, the world was actually doomed right then and there. What can I say? I'm a sucker for world-ending stakes. That's just my thing. And lastly, I think that villains could still work in a modern setting because they still have yet to realize their full potential. Like I said earlier, as much as I love the earlier generations, looking back on their stories, a lot of the ideals and philosophies of the main villains can be boiled down to like cartoonishly evil, sometimes just straight up downright ridiculous. Which worked back in the day, but a lot of us are grown now and we kind of desire more nuance, more depth to our stories, to our characters. They can't be as simple and one-dimensional. And based on how they've been writing stories lately, I feel like they're more than capable of doing something like that. I would love to see Pokemon go all out on a true villain, somebody that really believes that they're the hero, they're a master manipulator, somebody that backs up their ideals so well that it might even convince the people in the world of Pokemon to be on their side about a lot of things. Hell, give me somebody so incredibly strong and scary, they're like the equivalent of like Sephiroth or something. I think we just have yet to delve deeper into what an antagonist can truly be. And I would just really like for them to delve head first into something like that. Write a villain that scares me to my core, but makes me think. That's all I'm really asking. So, final question. What is the likelihood of a real villain showing up in Pokemon Winds and Waves? I'll be honest, gang, if I had to place a bet on it, I don't know if Winds and Waves will be the game to go towards the truly dark villain route. Of course, I would be more than glad to be wrong. I just don't really get that kind of a vibe from this trailer. But again, it's only been the one trailer. We don't know anything about Winds and Waves yet. It just really depends on whether or not Pokemon wants to revisit its roots now that we've hit the 30th year anniversary and our double-digit generation of Pokemon. If there were ever a time to go balls to the wall with the writing, it would be now. But I'm not gonna hold my breath on it because they seem to be trying to strike a balance between kid-friendly but also kind of nuanced and having deeper themes that are hidden amongst the context. So that's just something we'll have to see about later. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me. So that just about does it for this one. I want to stream a little bit more. The problem is that I can only really stream kind of later at night, given my current living situation. So, I don't know if anybody's up at like later time, Pacific Standard Time. What would y'all want to see? Right, I still got Pokemon Fire Red Leaf Green just kind of sitting there. I'm down to do some kind of Soul Link or Nuzlocke with somebody, maybe some kind of challenge run, or maybe a shiny hunt situation. If y'all really want to watch me shiny hunt, that sounds awful. Resetting. But other than that, you know, I did recently stream both Pokopia and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Might continue the XD Gale of Darkness playthrough, but I'm definitely going to start working on my stream stamina by streaming on my second channel. I do want to stream playthrough the most recent Digimon game, Time Strangers, so that might be like a playthrough that I do. Like maybe I'll stream a couple times a week at night. So if anybody's down to chill out with me over there on Second Channel, I'll be doing that over there or on Twitch. Both are linked in my description. Whatever service is easier for you, follow that. But regardless, I am passing the mic over in your direction, and I want you guys to tell me everything that you're thinking in the comment section below. Do you agree that Pokemon Winds and Waves could potentially utilize a real villain to do some real damage, to really scare us and make us really want to work for the narrative and get something cool out of it, maybe a lesson to be learned? Or am I completely crazy? You're on the opposing side. We don't really need a real villain, just a situation that needs to be handled that's good enough for the narrative, and you want to focus on everything else that isn't the standard Pokemon good versus evil narrative. Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I'm always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, it does appear to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and do just so. I'd like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor of taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!